Hello and welcome to We Are the Deluge, a spoiler-free, chapter-by-chapter podcast about the climate change novel The Deluge by Stephen Markley. We are your co-hosts, Emily Crandall and John McMahon, and we do not feel like getting into an argument about object permanence today. Today we are discussing Executive Summary on the Elevated Price of Grain Staples 2034, set in 2034, the fourth chapter from Ash Year's point of view, which we are presenting in the form of an Ash-style report.
That's so funny because that's exactly what we want to talk about all the time or something like that. Yeah,
I think so. I promise I did not do a Lacan mirror stage theory to riff on the object permanence.
I mean, that could work though.
I am not capable of it. I don't know my Lacan.
Oh my gosh. Shall we begin with our abstracts?
We should. In my typical fashion, I tried to be obnoxious and do it in Ash's style. So you should give your, I'm sure, better and more direct abstract first.
Mine's not. I went short today. I went Ash hungers. He mourns, fears, yearns to read, understand, feed, and protect people as he tries to make sense of another loss.
That's really good. Grab your coffee, but buckle in. When we returned from our recent form-breaking mission of The Siege, a literary political junket for which I still feel a measure of awe, you asked me to complete this assessment of the domestic and global political, that is also personal situation, as it stands after 550 pages of skyrocketing action. My apologies for this document's tardiness. Here following is an effort to answer queries about this chapter honestly, and perhaps use it to explicate famine-agenic policy around the globe. Allow me to begin where I should have last month with the subject and object of my fascination, Ashir al-Hassan.
That's so good.
Sorry, not sorry.
No, I love it. I can hear him even though I don't know what his voice sounds like. Okay, so what do we learn in this chapter? We learn
that Seth was killed.
As
Ash learns it.
Yeah.
Or as Ash narrates learning it, perhaps more precisely.
And we learn sort of what happened to Ash during the siege, kind of. And we learn what he's working on next, which is this fact-finding trip mission to investigate the situation, the food situation, basically globally.
Yes. Which is Markley looking at the reader and saying, if you thought I've been too US focused, I'm going to remain very character focused and use this as a way to think about America as I have throughout the entire novel. And also we're taking an international focus in this chapter as well.
Yeah.
We found out more about Forrest Aslan Young, born July 29th, 2033, to, as Ash says, a woman who needed money to pay off law school debts. A little more Hanaya and Peter, who continues to be a bro with a heart of gold and is increasingly sketchy financial endeavors.
Yep. And Ash, it betrays a sort of knowledge, but also willful ignorance about what he's doing.
Apt way to put it, yes.
Yeah. We meet with Ash, Admiral Doms. And we get to see him defend himself a little bit to Ash in a kind of interesting way.
Doms struck me as a character from a different book.
Yeah.
If it covered the exact same universe of the Deluge, it's the way I was thinking about it is that if a Tom Clancy character walked into the Deluge by Stephen Markley.
Totally.
Where in that novel, he would be the hero as the cold... He would be the cold, rational hero who made the hard realpolitik choices and did the thing that needed to be done by staying in the administration and pushing back.
Yeah.
Exactly. And staved off the worst disaster. Yeah. And here, Ash correctly refuses him any sort of absolution while also recognizing that Doms did what he thought he best based on the information he had and the situation he was in at the time, which tells us a little bit about Ash as well.
Yeah.
But he's thinking it, and it's a little bit of character development potentially for Ash, right? He's thinking about the moral absolution level, and he's thinking about the I'm going to be as analytical and quote unquote rational about this as I possibly can at the same time. And I think that's a little characteristic of Ash in this chapter as well.
Yeah, I think that both registers and form the other more self-consciously in this chapter than we've seen before. I think we've seen him do it without realizing he's doing it, or doing it while he sort of negates the necessity for doing it. And here he's doing it self-consciously.
Yes, precisely. Yeah. And I'll have more to say about that, but we should probably save it for the body of the report.
Oh, right. We're still in the abstract. Oh dear. Also, Pastor is haunting this chapter.
Declares his bid for the presidency, which you heard Emily declare her / the pastor's candidacy for presidency in the headline splash.
It's me. I'm the pastor.
Well, I mean, Ash accuses Anaya of sounding like the pastor. Why not keep the accusations and projections going?
It's so funny. Anything we're missing in our abstract?
Just tiny, tiny plot details, right? We get Ash confirming his knowledge of basically the entire siege, as had been hinted at in the Ash and Tony chapters. Mm-hmm. And we get from Hanaya and Peter a little bit of additional perspectives or outside perspectives on the occupation, the siege, the massacre.
We also learn that the public knew very, very little.
Yes.
Until some days in.
Yes.
And that it was quite a while between the siege of the siege mm-hmm. and Ash getting the call about Seth. And in that time, it was just radio silence.
Yes.
Yeah.
Should we head to the body of the report?
Let's do it.
I believe you wanted to issue a follow-up, not correction.
Yes. Okay. So we were discussing. Thank you. We were discussing Terminator.
Yes.
In our second episode on the siege, the AI says, "Come with me if you want to live." I have never seen Terminator. Have you?
A very long time. So if the reference we got wrong, that I think it's not surprising.
So the day that we recorded that episode, I went to yoga or something, and I came home, and my partner Matt was watching Terminator 2 on the TV while he was making dinner. And I was like, this is so funny. We were just talking about the Terminator in this chapter where an AI releases this notification, quoting Terminator, and I've never seen it. And Matt was like, oh, well, you're going to have to call John and tell him to re-record the whole episode because the whole premise of Terminator is like a war against AI.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
And I was like, wait.
I knew. Yeah.
Why didn't we talk about that? That's so interesting. There's so many layers to that reference that because the Terminator, I mean, who do you trust, right? How is the Terminator sort of coming down philosophically on the question of either agency or moral, concern, or who do we feel kind of ethically bound to or with? What do we owe to who, right? And that there's just this little wink to that in the context of the siege is funnier than I realized. Is basically what the correction I wanted to issue.
Apparently, we should never underestimate the humor of or winkingness or what the fuckness of this novel.
Indeed. But back to this chapter.
I hear you've got a hot take for us.
I do have a hot take for us. Okay. There were a couple points. I know that our running kind of hot take is that Matt is the closest proxy to Stephen Markley.
Yes.
I want to say that Ash in this chapter, or posit or query whether Ash in this chapter is actually not just Markley, throwing a bunch of his own takes at the readers and asking the readers a bunch of difficult questions that are actually his questions, not Ash's questions.
I strongly support this take, but I want to hear more.
Okay. So I'm thinking in particular, there's a passage on 564 that is in Ash's voice, right? He's describing going on the fact-finding mission, and he says, again, I ask, who ultimately was this fact-finding mission for? And then again, on 567, there's this this bit about the arrogance of the living.
Oh my God.
Right?
These are the two passages I have most heavily highlighted in the entire chapter.
Like he's like, I thought of the arrogance the living carry. We ensconce ourselves in an epistemological certainty born from the mere fact that we've known history marginally longer than the dead. We elbow each other knowingly at their failures and ignorance. We almost never ask what it is we don't yet know. Like the first person in both of those moments felt like Markley to me, not like Ash. Like Stephen Markley being like, I'm almost 600 pages into this thing that's taken me however many years at this point whenever he writes that specific line, right?
Yeah.
And like, what the fuck is wrong with all of you? Why are we doing any of the things we're doing? Who is it all for? Like that question just like stabbed me in the heart. And I was like, I feel like this chapter is not a chapter about Ash. This chapter is a chapter about Stephen Markley. And that's my hot take.
Would you extend the hot take to say that, again, I ask who ultimately was this fact-finding mission for, is also a question for himself about what is the purpose of this novel amid the horrors that the novel writes about?
Yes. What is the purpose of this novel?
And its readership
Why are you here? You, Emily and John, making this podcast.
Damn. It's a question I ask myself and then
and
shove into the recesses of my embodied brain.
Right. And like, why, what are we not asking ourselves about what we don't yet know? And I just like, this chapter gave me chills.
Over and over again, it does.
Yeah.
I like this take for many reasons. One of which is that it implicates the reader in a way that I enjoy. And actually at the moment in Not Quite Great Books and my other podcast, Danielle and I are in the end of season 5 of The Americans, in which there are several devices that are used over the back half of that season of The Americans that potentially implicate or impose upon the viewer to ask, what do you get out of the spectatorship of the violence in this show?
I love that.
Or the psychic violence that happens to characters, or that physical violence that's carried out. And so this notion that Markley 560 out of 870 pages in is like, what the fuck is all of this for?
What are you doing here?
What are you doing here?
And I think it works in the Ash format too, because it's addressed to a second person. So it calls in the reader in a way that Matt chapters do not. And when he drops a line like, what is the line I just read? The arrogance of the living, right? Like it lands in a different way than some of the more flowery language that Matt uses, even when Matt describes something really beautifully or like taps into a like, you know, transcendent like sense of what it means to exist and to like feel and to love or whatever, right? But like when Ash does it, it like lands differently, and it also feels like it's directed at you, right? Like you are the living right now reading this chapter, and like what arrogance you have just by virtue of finding yourself here, right?
I don't know if it triples or quadruples. I'm not sure how many meanings we have at this point. They're just proliferating everywhere. But we almost never ask what it is that we don't yet know is true of the limited but expansive universe of this novel. The reader, doesn't know what's coming, but Markley, as authors of the novel of Ash, qua Ash, does. There's the what is it that we don't yet know about our own present, because we're spending our time reading this book and asking what it's for and coming up with pop culture and theory to pair alongside it, as opposed to whatever a potential alternative use of that time is. It's the almost never ask what it is we don't yet know on the meta historical scale as well.
There are some other specific things that are not like meta storytelling aspects that I feel like are Markley speaking to us in this chapter. It's like when Ash says that the most edifying to the Admiral are not the states we visited, but those we were not allowed into. When he talks about like the term faminogenic policy is not, no one has coined that yet. Like that's like Markley making up a new political economy term.
Yes.
Right. And like, and arguably in this chapter, explaining it with analysis vis-a-vis an argument, right? Like,
yes,
this is not only Mark Lee showing his cards to the reader, but this is also Mark Lee doing political theory. I'm sorry. Like,
it absolutely is. And I suspect, and at times, actually, when I taught this novel, there was a little bit of this critique from my students of this novel being like overly grandiose or something like that, or at times the language becoming too flowery. Mm-hmm. But I think that when that happens, or when Mark Lee is showing off something or other about his writing, it's almost always so pointed that I don't care, because that kind of stuff can certainly bother me about, as much as I am also allured by something like that. It can really turn me off, but it rarely and maybe almost never does, which maybe makes me the wrong person to be on this podcast because I'm just so in for this novel. But
well, I mean, I don't think you can do a podcast like this on a book like this and not be in on it. Like, what?
Yeah.
Otherwise, who is it for, John? Okay. But another, like, calling in to himself in his discussion of the commodity trader.
Oh my God, what a phrase. Says,
in the middle of all this, Earth's most fearsome species, the commodity trader and his algorithms of ultra-fast trading, sees only profit. Scarcity is lucrative. Prices surge as Wall Street hoards grain futures. But he says, this, I fear, includes Peter's firm, which has been particularly aggressive in the commodity broad basket space. Therefore, I cannot escape my own complicity, right? Which is, I think, also Mark Lee, also us, right? Like, we cannot escape our own complicity, the many multiple layers of that. And I also think there's a read of Ash's political prescriptions at the end that is just like what Mark Lee thinks should happen.
And it's, I fine cryptically foreshadowing. It's not the first time that's going to happen.
Right.
Or excuse me, not the last time it's going to happen. Yeah. It is the first time, kind of.
Yeah.
Although we kind of got the bill from Fierce Blue Fire earlier on.
Yeah.
That particular sentence, the Earth's most fearsome species, the commodity trader and his algorithms of ultra-fast trading, sees only profit. Thinking about Mark Lee as political theorist, that's written as if Karl Marx wrote that passage.
Yeah,
the sentence structure, the terminology, the coining of the commodity trader as the Earth's most fearsome species, that's straight out of Capital Volume 1 or the Grundrisse.
Totally. I actually have a cultural artifact I can pair with this.
I think it's time.
Okay. So we have fearsome species, commodity trader, algorithms of ultra-fast trading, seeing only profit, scarcity is lucrative, prices surge as Wall Street hoards grain futures. And then later, right, he's talking about his own complicity. Peter remains quiescent about the real-world effects of agro trading and speculation, but nevertheless, the major food multinationals, Archer Daniels Midlands, Cargill, Bunge, are experiencing their most profitable years on record. So that passage paired with the discussion of the wealthy purchasing food readouts on 569.
Okay.
So I've
got a couple ideas of where this is going, and I'm intrigued by all of them.
So this is just a short kind of description, but this is like Ash talking about the unpredictable social consequences of hunger, basically. So panic buying due to perceived shortages has led to riots, blah, blah, blah. According to Peter, many affluent individuals are buying food readouts, huge storage facilities filled with non-perishable goods that can be loaded into armored trucks and delivered to them in case of emergency. Have you Googled or like looked at an image of a redoubt, by the way?
No, I have not. I'm going to do that right now.
It looks sort of panopticon-y, which is fascinating. But I want to propose pairing this dimension of this Ash chapter with the novel Odds Against Tomorrow by Nathaniel Rich from 2013. Have you read it?
I have not.
Okay, I'm going to read the back of it just for a little bit of dramatic context.
Please.
New York City, the near future. Mitchell Zakor works on the cutting edge of corporate irresponsibility and business is booming. A brilliant mathematician, he spends his days calculating worst-case scenarios for Future World, a consulting firm that indemnifies corporations against potential disasters. As Mitchell immerses himself in the calculus of catastrophe, he exchanges letters with Elsa Brunner, a college crush with her own apocalyptic secret, and becomes obsessed by a culture's fears. When Mitchell's darkest predictions come true and an actual worst-case scenario engulfs Manhattan, he realizes that he is uniquely prepared to profit, but what will it cost him? So basically,
Amazing.
he develops a whole career selling fears back to people as insurance and then like making money on catastrophe, essentially. And he's portrayed as kind of like an idiot savant, maybe on the spectrum or something like that, right? Like, and what happens eventually is that like Manhattan floods. The sea level rises rapidly during a storm. And like every fail-safe that the island of Manhattan has in place to guard against sharp rise breaks, right? Doesn't function. And there's mayhem in the streets and the water is climbing higher and higher and higher. And he's getting richer and richer and richer, right? But he also starts to sort of like lose his mind. And it strikes me as like an interesting way in both artifacts to think about speculation in political economy. And like Ash is very against this. He comes down hard on it, or Ash Qua Markley, right, comes down really hard on it in the list of policy prescriptions that like speculation in commodities is only ever going to produce chaos, is sort of like where he comes down. And what's interesting about Odds Against Tomorrow is it's like, it's chaotic even for, or especially for, but not like uniquely for the people who profit from it. So there's like something about profiting on other people's misery and suffering and like sort of betting that about what people will do when they panic, which is another way of thinking about speculation, right? It's not just speculating about something sort of like real value, but it's speculating about how people responding to things in the world will suddenly understand the like abstract value of a thing that either they need or that they think they need, which is another like layer of speculation that is totally manufactured, right? Totally fabricated. That like that there's something sort of extra chaotic about that we can't really predict in advance, even though the whole thing is premised on our capacity for prediction, but it's a prediction about how people will respond to or think about something that we can't predict, but we can minimally predict at least that something will happen, right? Like, sorry, this is like, it's really hard for me to trace all the moves because I think they're done so subtly and so without acknowledging that those are the moves that are being made, that it's hard to actually draw those lines. But like it all screams danger. And I think in both cases, what we get is an insight into the psyche or the mind or the thinking of the people who are sort of like architects of this danger, who not only know that it's dangerous, but they experience it also as danger. And it kind of boggles my mind.
I love this cultural artifact because I think there's additional places where I thought you maybe were going based on your description before you named the novel, and then even in your description of the novel. And most of all, I thought you were maybe going to go to The Big Short, which is all about really financial speculation, about financial speculation, in which by correctly diagnosing the problems with the speculation, you enrich yourself but also point out how fucked society is. So there's that part of it. I also like this cultural artifact because there is a character who is engaged in that from a very different ethical and political valence, and that is Archana Bhattacharya, who is profiting off of funding 6 Degrees because she knows what the targets are and is able to short the companies before they get bombed.
Yeah. And she's very self-conscious about the fact that her, right, like investment in 6 Degrees has this like totally self-serving benefit to it, even if we are also supposed to read her as like in some way, I don't know, ethically or ideologically invested, right? Which I think that is not, so far hasn't been explicitly taken up, but the door is open. Is that right? A fair read?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. But it strikes me that Ash is the right character to pair this novel with too, because of like, I think stylistically or narratively, what does having a character who can't bullshit do for the project of revealing to a like lay person or an everyday person caught up in speculation, but who doesn't understand it? It's like real kind of machinations, if that makes sense.
because Ash is also thinking on the level, on the broadest possible historical and cosmological level often.
Yeah.
And I think, according to your earlier remarks, Markley is as well. I'm thinking about the way this is like 568, and he narrates this all as a kind of like Malthusian genocide through big data, but also a Malthusian genocide through big data and people's selfish desires for their own children, including his own, or what he should, or how Peeta and Hanaya treat their kids, right? Gregory and Noor. And this is against the backdrop of, we mentioned kind of politics as usual in the previous chapter, that really hyper fucked up politics as usual is the backdrop that insists on being the foreground because of American empire and American exceptionalism throughout this chapter too. Who's going on the fact-finding trip is a matter of like jockeying and wrangling.
And it seems to be more important in some way than the mission itself.
Yes, precisely. Yeah. Despite Ash's insistence that like hunger will assert itself over literally all things, it is playing out against all of the cuts that Love and Congress / Doge had made. It's against the, we would probably use the term ecofascism of let nature take its course. And Ash diagnoses that as people exorcising their fear through maximum cruelty. That's 567. So Ash is thinking about this on that level as well, and kind of the international cascades and the historical actors and the actants of geology and history and climate. So, this is the synergistic efforts of soil degradation and desertification and salinization as what he calls precursors in the collapse of every civilization.
Yeah.
I'm going to enter my theory here, if you don't mind.
Great. Okay.
I thought I was going to do it later. I'm actually going to throw it here. So I want to pair with this Ash chapter and this conversation we've just been having, Dipesh Chakrabarty's The Climate of History, 4 Theses, the 2009 article. Ash is always thinking about history. It struck me in this chapter. He's always thinking about the Anthropocene. He's always thinking about large and long scale forces of time and agency in a way that other characters do oftentimes when they're more lyrical, but there's something about the way that Ash is doing so that becomes more part of his everyday engagement. And so I think that he is the character who is most thinking with the Anthropocene, and then perhaps maybe this furthers your thesis that he is a Markley stand-in. So Dipesh Chakrabarty's The Climate of History, 4 Theses appears in Critical Inquiry in 2009. I could talk a lot, and actually I believe we recorded an Always Already podcast probably way back in the day about this piece.
Yeah, I think we did.
So instead of kind of going through, providing an overview, I'm going to state Chakrabarty's, quote his 4 theses and offer one Ash thought on each of the theses.
Okay, great.
If that's acceptable.
Yeah.
Okay. So the first thesis, this is page, if you find the article, you just Google it in PDF, it'll come up to page 201. Thesis 1. Anthropogenic explanations of climate change spell the collapse of the age-old humanist distinction between natural history and human history. And as I kind of stated in my warm-up to the Chakrabarty, this is very much on Ash's mind. It's been on his mind in the previous chapters, in which he is thinking about humans and thinking about natural history that acts on a very different time scale, and what happens when those two things converge. And so the way that Chakrabarty starts that thesis is saying that philosophers and students of history have often displayed a conscious tendency to separate human history from natural history. And this is what can the climate humanities do to answer the question that Markley posed to himself / the readers, is to maybe not kind of explicitly model collapsing that distinction, but establishing a character who doesn't buy into that distinction in the first place. And I think that Ash is able to do that. So that's Chakrabarty's first thesis. Chakrabarty's second thesis, the idea of the Anthropocene, the new geological epoch where humans exist as a geological force, severely qualifies humanist histories of modernity and globalization. And this poses a problem both for Ash and then also for Markley, because as we've remarked a couple of different times, this is a very American book and an America-focused book. And what this chapter does, and maybe this is Markley offering up his political theory or his political program or whatever, but it's also Ash. And Ash is the character who most turns our attention, I think, to international right matters among all of the 6 or 7 main characters, the 6 POVs plus Kate, I should say. And I think what Ash does is simultaneously try to embrace some of the supposed connections that modernity or globalization bring about from a humanist perspective, while also qualifying the effects of what we call modernity or globalization, or how we understand the kind of telos of modernity or globalization. Because simultaneously, I think Ash is aware of the way that what humanist histories would call modernity or globalization are the tiny speck of history amidst the geological epoch. And yet they fuck up a lot of stuff in the interim. And I think Ash is deeply aware of that. But there's also this moment in the chapter where he's like, look, the simple fact is that it's easier to grow things in one place than it is the others. So we should stop holding on to nostalgia for farmers in the place where it doesn't make sense to grow stuff, pay them to do something else green and farm elsewhere. And so like knocking down trade barriers is also part of Ash/Markley's political theory, even as the capitalist forces that bring about the question of what do we do about liberalizing quote unquote trade have contributed to the problem as it intersects the geological epoch. Okay, third thesis.
Put a pin in that. I'm going to pick up on that in my theory.
Perfect. Third thesis. The geological hypothesis regarding the Anthropocene requires us to put global histories of capital in conversation with the species history of humans. And here is where I think Ash's deep ruminations and enactments in his own and others' life about hunger really is a Deleuzian experiment about what it would mean to put global histories of capital in conversation with the species histories of humans, because Ash wants to think not just about his relationship to Forrest or what it means to be Forrest's father or for Forrest to be his son, but what that means for fatherhood itself in the species history of humans and the way that fatherhood or parenthood in Ash's point of view scrambles optimized, rational, but also potentially more ethical or just modes of living out the species history of humans, and that it's those worst tendencies within what Ash might call the species history of humans that is in this mutually exacerbating vicious cycle with global histories of capital.
Right. Or that to attend to the species can be an act of fatherhood, right?
Yes.
Is I think another
I love that. Yeah.
I don't know what metaphor, spatial or shape metaphor we're using there, but another facet of that kind of configuration. Yeah.
That's giving Ash Red full surrogacy now.
Yeah.
which I thought about for this chapter. And then the fourth thesis from Chakrabarty, the cross-hatching of species history and the history of capital is a process of probing the limits of historical understanding, which I would return to where you started us in thinking about Markley's question of, well, what is all this for? Him writing, us reading, the character of Ash going on the junket or whatever, in which even if it's a desperate hope or an unlikely wager or whatever the case is, that Markley's maybe not conscious and maybe something he would even consciously reject hope is that this novel or the novel is a form that can probe the limits of historical understanding. Witness the part that you read from 567 about we only know a tiny bit more history. We elbow each other knowingly at their failures and ignorance. We almost never ask what it is that we don't yet know. That this novel is also an experiment in figuring out what we don't yet know. And as a result, probing the epistemological limits that he has placed throughout. And thus, I will close finally with quoting the very end of the Chakrabarty article. Species may indeed be the name of a placeholder for an emergent, new, universal history of humans that flashes up in the moment of the danger that is climate change, but we can never understand this universal. It is not a Hegelian universal arising dialectically out of the movement of history, or a universal of capital brought forth by the present crisis. Jumping ahead a tiny bit. Climate change poses for us a question of a human collectivity in us, pointing to a figure of the universal that escapes our capacity to experience the world. It is more like a universal that arises from a shared sense of catastrophe. It calls for a global approach to politics without the myth of a global identity, for unlike a Hegelian universal, it cannot subsume particularities. We may provisionally call it a negative universal history. And I would close by suggesting that perhaps this novel is a negative universal history.
Wow, that's so good. I think that's also really an apt pairing for Ash, too, because I was recently reading his book. Mm-hmm. What's the book called?
It's based on that essay, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's called The Climate of... I think it's called The Climate of Man, no?
Climate of History?
Climate of History? Yeah, Climate of History. But he has an interesting kind of squabble with science studies in the introduction to that book.
Nice.
Which is that I think there's a bit of a straw man problem there, although he has like a note that is like, thank you to so-and-so for pointing this out to me. And he's talking about a really, I think, marginal or like maybe kind of stylistic flourish or tendency in some science studies to like, or maybe like the ways in which they try to like dethrone the authority of science, right? And that like that is viewed as sort of saying that science can't say anything at all. So he sort of like makes an almost like Cormac McCarthy, right? Like claim that's like, if everything is fate and fate is the law, then is fate subject to the law, and is there no such thing as law or no such thing as fate, right? Like, and I think Chakrabarty like is worried that science studies is doing that with science, right? That like if science is not the authority, does it have any authority or something? And I think that's like, I didn't love his discussion of it in the intro, but I totally understand where it's coming from and the urgency and necessity of kind of parsing out those things. But I also think Ash that's his like existential struggle, right? Is that like, if the things that are like facts about what I understand the world to be, if those are not trustworthy or not static, then like what am I what ground do we have to kind of stand on from which to reason, right? And in this chapter, he's really like trying, I think, to bring reason together with like the affective experience of living, right? So like hunger, which we'll turn to shortly. But so I think that's like, just in general, Chakrabarty's a really good pair with Ash in terms of like how they think about the role of science and this kind of like the almost like competing time scales that are like not self-consciously competing with one another. Let me
go to your theory.
Yeah, let me offer that, and then we can pivot to hunger.
I probably want to actually do my cultural artifact after your theory. We'll do a full Ash chapter. There's just giant sections of digression. All over. Yep.
Okay, so I want to propose that we think Ash's policy program with Maurizio Lazzarato's Capital Hates Everyone. I've been thinking a lot about The Indebted Man and about, what's his other book that we did on Always Already?
Signs and machines.
Yeah. Just in general, kind of like the way Markley thinks about political economy and capitalism in particular as kind of like constituting subjects. I think Lazzarato is really useful there. And especially, I remember we talked about Signs and Machines with Sumru. And one of the things that we were really interested in is like how a lot of his arguments kind of dovetail with feminist arguments, but he doesn't cite any feminist scholars. And I think that that's a kind of interesting also way to think about gender in this book and sex in this book and Markley as a man writing women and so on and so forth. But I was like, there's something about this chapter where like debt and subjectivity kept kind of coming to mind, but it wasn't exactly spot on. So I was like, all right, what has he written recently that would like help us a little more make sense of this chapter? And I was just like, oh my God, Capital Hates Everyone is such an incredible name for a book. It's very, very funny. But I was also thinking about how, to your point about Ash sort of trying to reconcile, right? Like the geologic history with human history and like the species versus the kind of like culture or something like that. I was thinking about debates about the Anthropocene and like other ways to characterize this new geologic era that don't sort of commit the same error of centering the human in a way that like sort of obscures our interconnectedness with non-human nature or like obscures the agency of things or something like that. And I was thinking about like if we could think about feminogenic as one of Markley's kind of proposed additions to a conversation like that. And I was thinking about like Plantationocene as a kind of alternative proposal and thinking about the like invention of new frames to theorize like not even just capitalism, but like crises that flow from capitalism as usual, but in disaster mode, right? And like debt and indebtedness is, I think, like for Lazzarato, the frame that is most operative kind of in the neoliberal context. But here we're in like, I don't know. And now I'm doing the thing that you were talking about earlier. Like I'm confusing the world of the book with our own world, but like arguably post neoliberal in the novel and the world, according to many like scholars of neoliberalism. And it strikes me that like this list and thinking about the argument that this list is making about the world is also a place where Lazzarato can kind of help us think about the tension between fascism and revolution, which is the frame of Capital Hates Everyone. So his argument is basically, and I'm not going to do a super deep dive into the text because I want to spend some time with Ash's list, but like the basic argument of the book, right, is that like capitalism hates both the people it exploits and the people who profit from it. And like in part that's sort of baked into its mechanisms, and that like actually to get the things that we need, there are really only two options at this moment, right? At a moment of extreme what's the word that he uses? He doesn't use the word crisis. He uses the word, apocalyptic times, right? In apocalyptic times, basically the only mechanisms we can, or the levers we can pull to kind of to deliver ourselves the things that we need are either fascism or revolution. And he obviously comes down on the side of revolution. But I like think about, I'm going to just do a little like read of this list, but not in depth. So this is on 570. And the caveat is that, or the premise of this list is, if the United States is to avoid social chaos stemming from high food prices and growing famine. So already like tying those three things kind of really intimately together, right? In the sort of like function of this list.
And it's a must for Ash/Markley.
Yeah. So deliver 7 million tons of food to the UN World Food Program, right? So just like transfer these material goods from one place to another, right? Fully fund SNAP food assistance, expand it to households at 300% of the poverty line, a domestic and global campaign to reduce food waste, pass a new law to curb speculation in the commodities market, immediately end biofuel subsidies, divert that land to food production wherever possible, tax meat consumption, do away with trade barriers and subsidies completely, which John spent some time talking about extensively, adopt the model, right, of a fierce blue fire to promote wide-scale urban farming, permaculture, agroforestry cooperatives. Federal and state governments should begin to use eminent domain to tear out golf courses, ski resorts, horse farms, bring back the victory garden, right, from World War II. Like, even if every family grows tomatoes in their backyard and that's it, that makes a huge difference, right, in the sort of like economy of food production and consumption. Water recycling, right, harvesting urban sewage. And then this really, really long diatribe against the U.S. pet industry, which was also the like nail in the coffin for me, that this is just Markley's hot take about pets, that like I think Markley thinks people should not have pets.
Okay, so while you're going, I'm going to get on Instagram and see if there's any record of Markley on his Instagram with any pets.
But the pet diatribe is hilarious. It's like, pets take so much food. Also, not to be crass, but like pets are edible, right? Like he's like just has this whole, and he's not wrong is the other thing, right? Like think about this all the time as pet owners and like pet owners, right? Is also an uncomfortable, difficult, conceptual, philosophy or whatever.
You mean as Larry was sitting on my lap while I was rereading this part of the chapter yesterday?
That's exactly what I was
thinking about it.
Yeah, we need funding for research in food production, and then like aquaculture, right? We need these ventures to do aquaculture. So it strikes me that like capitalism, if we can sort of like Lazzarato ascribe it with some like, what's a word to describe like liking something or not liking something? It has like, I don't know, preferences or taste. Yeah. To the degree that capitalism has preferences or tastes, I don't think it prefers or has a taste for any of these proposals. There's like, it's hard for me, and arguably democracy too. And I think we could like read Lazzarato's critique of capitalism as in some ways a critique of like democracy as usual or politics as usual, to kind of dovetail from our last episode. So like, tell me one capitalist or democratic lever we could pull to achieve any of these goals. And like Ash is writing this as a political advisor to a regular ass politician in the US. And it's like, he has to know, like, these are both rational proposals, right? But also like deeply irrational proposals. Do you know what I mean?
I know precisely what you mean.
And I think that that's something that Lazzarato is trying to get at, is that like when we have conversations about kind of like what's strategically viable or like how to harness, the market to address these solutions, that we talk about that as like the only rational response, but it's actually deeply irrational because it's impossible.
Paging Mark Fisher in Capitalist Realism.
Right. Yeah. So like, I don't know, capitalism hates everyone just struck me as like a really perfect framework. And maybe even democracy hates everyone as a perfect framework to think about what is both like urgently rational, but also deeply, deeply irrational about Ash's proposed policy reforms.
Yep.
Do we buy this?
I buy it fully and completely.
Like when I was reading this, I was like, this all sounds amazing. And the way Ash lays it out, and we've talked about this before, he's like, this is the only thing that makes sense. But in the context that he finds himself in, none of these things make sense.
Yes. And this is where Ash and Tony converge.
Right. And so the problem is not like convincing people that it is the thing that makes sense. The problem is that the context has to change, right? Like the context and this making sense are incompatible. So if we don't want to give up on the thing that makes sense, we need a new context for making it make sense.
And to use another theory analogy that we've touched on at various points throughout our journey, it's as if Ash wants climate Mao to implement climate X.
Yes.
That's the only mechanism through which it could happen.
Yeah. Yeah.
Can I offer my cultural artifact, which a little bit picks up on a couple parts of your discussion of Lazzarato?
Please.
So I would propose this chapter and this novel as a whole as the connective tissue between a double feature that I otherwise would have never thought to put together. Part one of the double feature is Zone of Interest. Part two of the double feature is Eddington, which I just saw 2 days ago.
Oh, I'm so excited to see that.
I'm not going to spoil it. I'll talk general premises and themes, but I'm not going to spoil it. Since, although by the time that our listeners hear this, they've had their chance to see Editing. But anyway, there's something.
La la la.
There's something about the Zone of Interest that struck me as indicative of Ash's ruminations on the large scale everydayness of the violence that is perpetrated and the ability to focus on family, the ability to focus on interpersonal relationships, the attempt to go about living your lives and engaging in the everydayness as you are literally next door in the case of the Zone of Interest, is you are occasionally next door in the Deluge or in the US, but certainly in a global level next door to genocide, to the ceaseless rationality that drives the faminogenic genocide that Ash is talking about, or the genocide of the Holocaust that is depicted but not depicted in the Zone of Interest. And that aspect of it kind of just struck me. This question about what would it mean and what would it require to confront the ceaseless rationality of an ongoing genocide as you live your day-to-day life, right? Which obviously is a question we ask ourselves, on a daily basis about any number of things. So that's the kind of Zone of Interest end of it. And it passes through the Deluge on the way to Eddington. And Eddington strikes me that there's something about kind of narrative structure and form that resonates very deeply with what Markley is doing in the Deluge. That both of them are Ari Aster, the director and co-writer, I believe, of Eddington, and then Markley with the Deluge, are trying to raise questions about the possibilities, but also impossibility of narrativizing the contemporary or getting a reader or viewer into a different affective and phenomenological state so as to gain a different sort of anchor or perspective on the contemporary or on their own particular lives. Both of them are interested in various forms of formal innovation in order to do so. We've gone on at length about what Markley is doing, and something like the digressions in Ash, or the way that he writes his reports, or the text bubbles of the Shane chapter, or whatever the case may be, strike me as resonant with the way that Ari Aster uses screens and devices in Eddington. I will say, I think Eddington is the movie that has best used screens and devices of any movie I have ever seen. And there's kind of that question as well. Both Markley, if not this particular chapter, are kind of terrifyingly funny, and it's some of the same targets. And then the point where I want to problematize Eddington and the Deluge back through the Zone of Interest is that both of them are, both Eddington and Deluge, and Ash ultimately in the Deluge, are asking questions about the violence that is potentially or actually endemic to America and its self-mythos and self-mythologizing, at the same time that by its very U.S. focus might mean that a lot is missed. And so much as Ash as a character in this chapter in particular is a mechanism through which Markley problematizes the Americanness of the novel, Zone of Interest potentially problematizes some of the Americanness of the story of Eddington, or the themes of Eddington, and how Eddington thinks about violence and the Americanness of violence versus a kind of more go back to Chakrabarty, species level violence. So
I love that.
You're going to watch Eddington. You're going to go watch Eddington, then read all of the Deluge, then go watch Zone of Interest, or the other way around.
Ooh, wow.
That's my prescription.
That's incredible. I'm so excited for that movie. I can't wait.
It's one of the funnier movies I've seen as of late as well.
I do think there were a couple things in this chapter that were funny. They're dark, but I mean, the diatribe against the pet industry had me laughing so hard. It's it's dark, right? He's basically proposing that people either eat or set free their pets.
Yes, I think that's the prescription.
Which is kind of a ridiculous proposal, but like the way it's laid out so rationally, it's just that it's really funny. I thought that was like really, really well rendered comedically.
Look, I just had to order a refill of Larry's like fucking prescription food.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I also laughed at Dom's telling or trying to absolve himself to Ash and saying like, Christ, Caperna wanted to hit them all with a drone strike, and Ash saying, I could not tell if he was joking. Like Ash narrating his own like inability to read people still really gets me because it is funny the way that he does it, right? He delivers it comedically at the same time as he's sort of disavowing his ability to do nuance or do comedy, which is like just very funny.
There's a similar vibe to a line from the bottom of 554. I shut off the speech when the driverless reached the National Mall. Seth and I met while running its length, and I still viewed the space with what one calls romance or nostalgia, which Ash doesn't feel, but also recognizes and or potentially feels while disavowing that.
Yeah.
So.
I also thought the first thing in this chapter that made me develop this working theory that this chapter is just Markley telling us his views on things. I wonder whether Stephen Markley hates SNL.
Oh, yeah.
Right? That Saturday Night Live had its season premiere, though I detest that cloying, obnoxious program. Seth was a devoted fan, and his amusement at such uninspired humor amused me. Like, I feel like that scathing of an analysis has to come from at least a kernel of truth.
It's an excellent point.
And it's really funny.
Yeah. And also, I mean, the line that I use is the opener where Ash and Hanaya are arguing, and Hanaya appeals, Ash, you've been through a devastating life event. Why do you have to go do this? It can't be good for you or Forrest. He knows one of his daddies is gone, even if he can't express it, yet he knows. And then Ash, I doubted Hanaya was correct, but I did not feel like getting into an argument about object permanence. Yeah. Just the best Ash line, and it was also so just good. Really funny.
Yeah, I also liked when he says, this is dark, but I wish Seth were alive simply so I could hurl the childish taunt Honey and I once exchanged as children. I told you so. It's just like, ooh, yeah.
Yeah. Ugh.
Yeah. The ability to render comedic those lines in a chapter that's so heavy is really impressive.
I would agree.
Yeah. Should we pivot to the other big theme of this chapter, which I feel like we've been dancing around, but
I think so.
Yeah. I think maybe one of the things that's so interesting about Ash in this chapter is his descriptions of hunger. And I think it actually dovetails with like all the other ways we've been reading the theme of kind of like political economy broadly. Especially I think Chakrabarti as a useful frame too, right? Like for Ash, hunger in this chapter is sort of like a heuristic to think the human in a way.
Yes.
And like it has so many layers, hunger does. And I was like, whoa, what if like hunger, you could propose hunger as like the only, like in the Butler sense instead of precarity, like hunger, right? As like the kind of essential human condition. And I feel like that's kind of what Ash is doing here.
I do too. I mean, an essential human condition is the right phrasing, right? Because whether it's on 558, he talks about hunger as how it, quote, reveals how transitory our loyalties are to each other, end quote. Or when we get into talking about like the experiment itself and how much like Ash wants to sacrifice at some point, like Forrest's limited caloric diet for himself and like appropriate some of it for himself, that it kind of like has to take Ash's primary attention away from Forrest, away from Seth, this is like 560-ish, or the way it like imposes itself upon the mind body of the hungry person. Witness the scene, and I don't think it's a coincidence that this is one of Ash's more openly and baldly emotional moments is when they see a group of children, right, who are trying to like pick charred meat off of some incinerated livestock that had died from hunger themselves. That speaks to that. at the precise moment where Ash is like, I thought I saw Forrest there, or I think that one of those kids is Forrest.
Yeah.
And the primacy and the demand and the agentic force of hunger itself is something that Ash has the intellectual and I would argue as well emotional capabilities to think and feel his way through.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it's juxtaposed with like this discussion on 563, right? While predicting civil and geopolitical unrest is difficult in the specific, in the aggregate, it is relatively easy. Simply look at the UN Food and Agriculture Organization's food price index, right? Mm-hmm. When it breaches 120, there'll likely be war, riots, revolutions to varying degrees around the world. So like, he's like, it is affecting him, right? And we're getting his descriptions of how it's affecting him, both experiencing it, right? Like I think he's experiencing, like I sort of hinted at in my summary, like the loss of Seth as a kind of hunger. Mm-hmm. And as he's witnessing hunger, right? Which is different from analyzing the data, but he's doing both kind of concurrently, and like they're inflected and or like refracted in one another.
And much like hunger itself has this agentic force, the numbers themselves are actants, right? So I'm thinking about it, and I apologize for not writing down this page number. Integers are inhuman, yet I feel as though I must accord them space here. Again, there's a Markley reading of this, but even just as Ash, it's him, again, recognizing what the limits of that kind of calculative presentation are, while insisting that there's still this force that impels the calculative rationality onward.
Yeah. Integers, but like, yeah, I liked that. That's on 560.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's just a good phrase. Integers are inhuman, yet I feel as though I must accord them space.
Yeah. And much like there's the faminogenic policy, there's also, as he talks about, the administration of starvation, including in Gaza, right, which we are obviously witnessing more than just the administration of starvation, but the like active killing of people seeking to eat or acquire food.
Right, which Markley predicts as like this robo sniper and auto kill zone, but we're seeing it unfold in real time, right? With like by a slightly different name, but similar mechanism, right?
Precisely. Yeah. And that love might be in agreement with some of the administration of starvation.
Yeah. Yeah. That's the kind of like mic drop that Ash uses in the conversation with what's his name again?
Admiral Doms.
I almost said Dahmer, and I was like, nope, that's not right.
Well, it's very, very close. We get the DHM.
Yeah.
And Ash is, again, narrating this, and I think in a more rationality and emotion go together manner throughout. So 563, understanding hunger intellectually is quite different from seeing its dazed victims, disproportionately children, wasting away to their deaths.
So brutal. It just strikes me to your take that Dom's I let it out there. It's gonna slip now. That Dom's seems like a character who walked out of a Tom Clancy novel into the Deluge. He's the one who says war crimes and genocide about these specifically policies of starvation.
Yes.
Not Ash, right? And it like it buzzes in the air, right? Ash says. Which is different than him saying, like justifying the use of that word on the basis of some quantitative threshold or something like that, right? It buzzes in the air. It has an affect to it right? Does. That like speaks to, or I don't know, calcifies something for Ash or something like that. Yeah.
This is inextricably tied up with fatherhood for him too, because of and he calls it experiment that he takes on with Forrest at the end of the chapter as he's writing this report. So there's also a delirium, a hunger-induced delirium that drives the writing of this report that we're now reading. And maybe that's an in-text explanation for how Markley can come through, is that, right, he becomes this like voice among the delirium that Ash is feeling.
Right. And we don't learn that that's the condition he's in writing this until close to the end, right? Mm-hmm. That part of the chapter was really hard for me to read.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, it's terrifying, it's heartbreaking, it's chilling. I think that Markley definitely knows that, and I think Ash knows that as well.
Yeah.
And the way that Ash justifies it, although maybe that's even too strong a word and that Ash doesn't feel the need to justify it, but the way he provides some explication or elaboration of it is like, there's this way that Markley writes it as if it's driven dually by both Ash's trip, but also by Seth's death, such that the experiment becomes the performance of a sort of fucked up mourning for Ash. But like Ash ultimately then justifies it through that same language of necessity at the very end of the chapter. And that's maybe the most chilling or terrifying of it all.
Yeah.
Because I mean, this is child abuse, right? This is intentional, rationalized, well thought out child abuse.
Yeah, but also, I mean, the conclusion is chilling, right? He's like, as I finished the paper, I brought to a conclusion my experiment. No doubt you, my sister, anyone else would be aghast at the experience I put him through. But when I watched my sister blithely feeding Nora and Gregory, I'm convinced mine was an experiment every parent should force themselves to contemplate, for this is the future of our world. It wasn't the crying that persuaded me how necessary this exercise was, but the silence that followed. And then he goes, right, like, I had to go to another room because I felt as much violet fear as I can ever remember, a glowing amethyst coloring the fringes of every mental avenue. I missed Seth desperately, but this morning included the strangers I'd met the world over. It included an unquenchable desire to drain all the misery flooding our planet, to put back what has already left us. Mm-hmm. And then from there, food scarcity might be dwarfed by, right, the sea level rising.
Yes.
Yeah. Which also feels like foreshadowing, but like delivered in Ash's like cold, rational observation of the numbers, you know?
Yeah.
But it's also not cold and rational, right?
No, not at all.
Yeah. I feel like Ash must be really hard to write. So I guess like what's fun, but sort of from the writing challenge perspective of like putting him in a state of delirium is like using what's interesting about his character's observations of the world and interactions of the world to like point them in a slightly different direction, maybe, or like turn them inward a little.
Yes, because at the end of the chapter, it's as if Ash consciously or unconsciously calls out his own failure of his own rationality, right? Because the final couple of sentences, I listened to his breath whistling through his small lips. I yearned to build a wall as high as a skyscraper to protect him from all the unchecked suffering of our luckless civilization. And that's Ash saying, I felt the same pull that all parents do for their children, upon which I am placing some assignment of responsibility or blame for the faminogenic policy that I subjected myself and my son to.
Which at the beginning, I think the way he narrates that in the beginning is really interesting because he says, I didn't love him at first, right? But I felt the ancient dread that he might squirm from my hands and crack his head on the floor. So I feel ancient like even, dread. Right? That is like, it sort of undermines his observation of himself, right? He says, I felt nothing except, right, the ancient dread of not wanting to harm him, right? Is like sort of a different read of that, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
One of my hot takes about this chapter, and the fact that it comes in the chapter where he performs this like very cruel experiment, is that this is the chapter that belies Ash's self-understanding as well as neurotypical assumptions about the neurodiverse as unemotional, right? Because actually this chapter is full of Ash having lots of feelings, quite literally, and oftentimes using the language of feeling to do so. And as just pointed out, him closing on what he doesn't call an expression of love, but given the chapter that comes before it is absolutely an expression of his love for Forrest, that he is willing to betray his cool rationality or whatever, is, I think, testimony to that. So I'm thinking about a couple of places in the chapter that when the Hindu cop that he meets to sign the paperwork about Seth's death, he talked about how he had, quote, burned purple terror 555, felt burned purple terror in 555, and that he wondered what the family members of that cop were doing to Muslims in India.
Yeah.
Right. When he talks about not wanting to form the advocacy group with Seth's family members, I don't think that's because Ash is some unfeeling or unemotional being. Or on 559, when he talks about and reflecting back on his suicide attempt. I'm going to read that part. In that moment, I felt a flare of such jealousy, fury, hate, and total despairing loneliness. I had not felt such confluence since it overcame me one night as a young man in the Cambridge dorm room, and I took a walk down to the Charles River. And there's something about that remembrance is just so feeling and emotion drenched for Ash. And even he can't help but narrate that as such. And maybe it's a problem with the language or whatever, with language itself, I should say. Right. Or when he is on the trip, and I think it's Trufarlio, his mentor and advisor, and Ash says, this is 564. I longed to touch her hand and ask her if what I was seeing was in fact real, end quote. And these are just the instances that stood out the most to me. But in some ways, the last 25 minutes of our conversation have been about about the belying of Ash's supposed unemotionality or unfeelingness as a character, as a human, whatever the case may be. And
he talks about, was 557 the passage where he's declines to join the advocacy group with with Seth's family? So he says there that he felt his difference and deficiency acutely, which is an interesting way of narrating, right? One read of him not wanting to do it is that it's a lack of feeling, but he's it's an excess of feeling actually. Precisely. For Ash. And so and even as he in part understands that it might be perceived as a deficiency, or he might even feel deficient in some way, he's failed at something, it's ultimately a feeling for him rather than a reasoned kind of position, which I thought was kind of cleverly rendered there too.
Very much so.
Yeah. Ooh, this is a heavy chapter.
Very, very heavy chapter.
Have we missed anything in our report?
I don't think so.
I would just say, following on the Agamben biopolitics from the siege, that's another huge political theory theme that I think is kind of interesting to think about. I don't know. Is there work on this, reframing biopolitics ecologically?
There has to be.
There has to be, right?
I don't know it, but there has to be.
It just kind of struck me from a very nerdy political theory read of this chapter that's kind of what Ash is doing. Whether that's thinking about the ecological sort of effects of biopolitics, or how ecologically inflected. I don't know. There's something there, I think.
There is, because there's a making live and letting die, and the choice over what to literally the choice over what to do with food is a making live or letting die, or making die, or let me could also do in Mbembe necropolitics. Exactly.
And Ash says, right, this has become the line of the right wing is let nature take its course, which Ash is pointing out is not nature. It's people in positions of power making decisions. And so we have this almost kind of new iteration of nature that's underlying a regressive, violent policy of death, right? Yes. It's not, phrenology or eugenics. It's, I don't know, food scarcity or something.
But it's not that.
Right.
Witness the let them die, or let nature take its course is the same eugenic rationality, eugenic spin on Darwinism or social Darwinism, totally. Or the what Ash calls, in fact, letting nature take its course, quote unquote, is really just driven by zero-sum Malthusian politics, the top of 568. And eugenicism and Malthusianism have always often gone hand in hand with one another.
Yeah. Right. So sort of like a repackaged eugenics for food scarcity, but manufactured food scarcity too is the other thing.
Precisely. Yeah. And again, it gets back to that Ash has such a complex notion of agency and time and scale.
Yeah. Anything else we're missing?
I got nothing.
Great. Should we conclude with some episode titles?
Yes, I'm still deciding between a couple options. So why don't you go first?
Okay, I just ripped some of my favorite passages. I went with executive summary on the transpositions of time, the arrogance of the living, and the unchecked suffering of our luckless civilization.
Okay, I'll do the same thing. Executive summary on burned purple terror, the arrogance of the living, and the unchecked suffering of our luckless civilization, which were the three that I had listed.
That is hilarious.
Yep. Congratulations to us.
This is...
The singularity is real.
Yeah. Now we need to make a podcast about our podcast. Although I guess that's what the book is for.
Yes. But seriously, listeners, if you want to make a podcast about our podcast, we will listen and come on.
Whoa.
Yeah.
I'm going to lose all grip on reality.
Been there.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us. We have coming up next we have a New York Times guest essay from the former VP of the Love Administration, Aaron McQuirk.
Sure.
Yeah. Which I don't remember at all. So I'll be reading it with fresh eyes.
And then we've got Jackie 4, Guns, Walls, and Sulfur Dioxide, which strikes me as not a particularly Jackie chapter name. Set in 2035. The fact that it closes with Ash thinking about walls, and then that's in the chapter title of the next full chapter, is a thing.
Yes, great. Very not cryptic foreshadowing.
Yeah.
Just regular literary device foreshadowing.
Regular literary foreshadowing. I love it.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us on We Are the Deluge.
And We Are the Deluge.